Podcastle, episode 539 for September 18th, 2018. Flash fiction episode, The 3 Phases of Equinox. Rated PG-13. And welcome to Podcastle. I'm your host, Setsu Uzume. Happy Equinox, everyone! Well, almost. Fall equinox in the Northern Hemisphere will take place on Saturday, September 22nd, and the spring equinox in the Southern Hemisphere will be on Sunday, September 23rd. So we're almost there. The Flying Castle is in the Northern Hemisphere this round, so today's stories will reflect that. Growing up in a science-minded pagan household, we celebrated 4 main holidays: summer and winter solstice, and the spring and fall equinoxes. We always tied the seasons together, like freezing winter cookies to eat during the summer, or freezing summer berries to enjoy during the winter. The equinoxes were a little less formal, but they involved a lot of gardening along with the feast. This week's flash fiction episode includes 3 tales, and I hope you'll see the balance in them that I did. First up is The Mooncakes of My Childhood by Y.M. Pang. Read by me, Setsu Uzume.
The Mooncakes of My Childhood by Y.M. Pang. The mooncakes of my childhood were hard as rocks. I killed a man with them in the fall of '68. He didn't deserve it. He was just the grain seller. But mother had been killed by Red Guards, and father had hung himself after delivering his self-criticism. I changed from bossy big sister to all my brother had left. I had to feed him. I'd meant to steal the cornmeal, but the seller spotted me and I panicked, and when I saw the glint of his knife... It was nearing the Mid-Autumn Festival, and the mooncakes on a nearby stall lifted into the air. They shot toward the grain seller. One of them hit him on the head, and he dropped like a discarded puppet. I ran. Not before tossing a sack of cornmeal over my shoulder and grabbing an armful of mooncakes. Years later, I'd laugh at the absurdity that people on the other side of the Pacific were learning to breathe fire, to walk through walls, to rise into the air like birds. And all I gained was the ability to hurl mooncakes. I stole a lot that mid-autumn. Food, mostly. Amazing what a small army of levitating mooncakes could do. I wish I'd stolen more, because soon after mid-autumn I became mundane again. My brother rolled hard patties with his stubby fingers, filled them with peanuts, and called them mooncakes. I couldn't levitate them. My powers ultimately were tied to what the world perceived as mooncakes. You wonder why I'm not on the registry? Why even during mid-autumn I can do nothing these days? Here. See that? I can still lift it. You ever wonder why they make mooncakes soft now? The thin crust, the lotus paste, the egg yolk. The worst I can do to a man is smear his suit. Sometimes I wonder if I could have done more back in '68. Avenged mother, made father proud. But sometimes I'm just glad we survived.
Welcome back. The author had this to say about the story. When my parents were growing up in northeastern China, mooncakes genuinely were hard as rocks. The well-known modern version of mooncakes, lotus seed paste, salted duck egg, is a southern variation. I wanted to bring aspects of that era to the story, along with elements of the absurd. Our second story is There Is a Season by Lynn M. McLean. Read by Khalida Muhammad Ali.
There Is a Season by Lynn M. McLean. Read by Khalida Muhammad Ali. Her brother had sent out a group text this morning. Signs of a trespasser. the same northern goshawk brat they'd warned before for calling down the frosts too early. A family meeting tonight meant traveling today. It was time to get together anyway. It had been months. "I'll be there," she messaged back. "Just let me finish putting the garden to bed." She was looking forward to the gathering, to the laughter, the jostling, the games and the puzzle tournaments, the affection that warmed the harshest of winters. She'd rather it was summer still, but winter would come nonetheless, and it was easier to bear it with loved ones around. And if there was business to deal with, well, so be it. There was always something brewing, with so many personalities at play. The equinox had just passed, the darkness was building, and they needed each other. But now she'd have to rush. She reviewed her autumn mental checklist. She had already dispatched her garden's harvest, fruits and vegetables frozen, canned or transmuted by kitchen alchemy into glistening jellies, torrid sauces, and syrups that would linger on the plate, making sweet promises. Herbs had infused warm and fragrant oils and blossomed into ointments. They had hung in bunches until they were dry, and then gathered up and stored, they waited, crisp and curled and powdered, until the touch of boiling liquid transformed them into bursts of flavor, of health, of love, of altered realities. Then, as the season had settled in, she tended the plants, leaving fall detritus to nourish the soil. After the first frost, she'd planted spring bulbs, a promise to remember when huddled for warmth, facing into wintry blasts that forced narrowed eyes and keener vision. Today she'd stowed the yard furniture and the small ceramic garden gods, leaving nature's own shrines of death and resurrection to tide the garden over. She chortled a harsh ha of satisfaction at the summer memory of hundreds of rapacious Japanese beetles she'd drowned in bowls of water laced with dish soap. She'd left their sudsy, iridescent corpses in the beds as sacrificial sustenance in atonement for their savagery. Now for the final backyard tasks. Her feet were bare, the better to feel the sleeping roots. It was hard to dig her toes down into the mostly frozen dirt, but her autumn-lengthening nails helped. She missed the heat of the soft summer earth, the connection between herself and the pulse of the garden, so easy to make and keep, the fragrances that clung to her fingers and toes, the solid strength of her summer-browned body, and the heavy, wet heat and languid days and nights spent surrounded by the million tiny songs of a million tiny things. She stretched her mind down through her feet and out to the vegetation. All was well, with the flora slipping into dreams. She walked about the garden and touched each plant, tucking it in with her goodbyes. Step by step she freed herself from earth and nurturance. The ties to this season and this form fell from her body and soul like spent perennial vines. Fall made her calculating, sharper like an arrowhead. Her shoulders ached, eager to stretch and spread. Her bones had lightened as the heavier chores had been lifted from her to-do list. She locked the cleaned garden tools in their shed and turned to view her weather-tight house. The attic insulation was light, but she preferred a little heat to escape the roof over the winter. It was a comfort when you perched up there, observing the world. That's why her roof was black as obsidian and reflective as the glinting mass of her own head. Another gust of wind blew past. The last of the dead leaves rustled. Some of her siblings had come by to travel together. They waited, fretting, on the other side of the wooden fence, where the tall bare trees clustered. Hell, they were noisy. Her oldest sister called to her, shrill and impatient, sitting atop the fence. She hoped the neighbors didn't complain. She bade farewell to her sleeping garden, to her slumbering summer self. Another stinging gust brought the chill to focus her resolve. She shed her clothes, freeing the feathers that arrived with the autumn equinox, and which hid itching, waiting beneath her skin. She gave a final agonized wrench that redistributed joints and organs and shifted molecules to alternate spaces. And now to business. The winter birds have their rights, she thought, but so do crows, and we will not tolerate trespassers. Sometimes settling things the old way truly was best. Seasonal alterations complete, she honed her beak on a stone. With no roots to hold her to the earth, she rose, cawing to the sky to greet her family, and thought of today's matter, of turf and loyalty, of gleaming black eyes and blood.
And welcome back. Lynn had this to say about the story. This story was inspired by crows in my yard on a bleak winter morning as the wind hurled ice pellets at me. The birds' stark blackness against the white snow was striking at a time when I was longing for color, sunlight, warmth, and growing things. It made me think quite viscerally of balance and cycles in both our inward and outward lives, and how they are connected. Equinox is that magical moment of transformation, poised in the balance between cycles. Plus, I love crows and gardening, so what better things to combine? And now our third and final story, Antler, Ash, and Onyx, by A.C. McLaughlin. Read to you by our own Jen Albert.
Antler, Ash, and Onyx, by A.C. McLaughlin. Read by Jen Albert. The September she turned 14, Kara broke the engine that powered the world. Following a white-spotted fawn through the forest, she caught her foot in the sprawling roots of an old pine tree and tore a hole in a wizard's burrow. Brushing fragrant needles from her skirts, she found the guilty root had flipped up as if on a hinge. Through the gap, Kara could see a small cavern at the pine's underground heart. With only a few tears in her stockings and one to her knee, she soon wriggled through to the snuggery beneath. She had never seen an undertree before, but it seemed to Kara that this one was something special. Wires plugged into the roots of the pine itself, and waxy green lichen grew over batteries of jarred fireflies. A puffing chemistry set held a blue-silver liquid, iridescent as dragonfly wings. The web of interconnected tubes and beakers piped the scaly brew straight into a hunk of limestone, which in turn slew cedar-scented smoke into a wooden pail. Pinned beetles and framed feathers littered the tables and walls, some plugged into the machine. A stuffed marten posed, one paw perpetually outstretched, and on the highest shelf perched a particularly lustrous barred owl. All round the burrow, bowls and sherry glasses and button boxes held congregations of pebbles and bark strips and flower petals. Somehow each vessel, from thimble to hollowed-out turtle shell, connected to the next. Above it all, a set of brass scales hung, suspended by spider silk. Its weights all but balanced, with a pile of white sand on the left plate and rich loam soil on the right. As Kara watched, a dusting of black dirt fell from the burrow's roof, and the right scale sank, infinitesimally closer to its fellow. Directly beneath the scales, on a rough-hewn stool, snoozed the wizard himself, deep in hibernation like a great bear. The sorcerer's nose twitched mousily with each snore. Green and gray mushrooms grew undisturbed along the brim of his squat-wool hat. Under his propped-up feet, a wide slab of shale hunched. Here and there, chunky metal gears stuck out, whirring and chuntering. Levers made of small animal bones protruded from irregular openings, and, in the far corner, a small white flame burned in a bowl-shaped nest. It seemed frightfully confusing at first, but Kara soon found that, much like algebra, If you tilted your head and squinted, a pattern emerged. The way arithmetic books painted the world by numbers, so this strange room spelled it in another type of language. She puzzled out pieces. The egg cup filled with coarse golden grains meant bumblebees. The lapis-tipped needle in a glass of water meant kingfishers. And the small lever made of antler, that meant deer. Kara took a step forward, mind on the fawn that had fled her. Her shoes crunched a bone-filled pellet, yet still the wizard slept. So Kara gathered her resolve and stretched out a hand to the slender lever. But as her finger touched horn, a pair of onyx eyes snapped open. Not the wizard, but the owl. Broad, brown-barred wings bore down, and the black eyes' silent intensity made Kara's heart quail. Her courage broke, and she snatched back her hand. Too hastily. Her fingers caught the slender lever of antler, pulled it to its full measure. It snapped. And then a cable broke. Then another. A file of baby blue eggshells shattered. A pipette of soft yellow blossoms burst into sudden flame. Shelves tipped and pebbles scattered, and every complex thread of the room's web unraveled before Kara's eyes. The wizard vanished in a sulphurous puff of smoke. The owl wheeled away, and Kara stood alone in the silent, ruined burrow at the heart of a pine tree. She fled home, closed the windows, and dashed the heavy curtains shut. But that night, onyx eyes haunted her dreams. She flew on brown-barred wings over the forest and through the seasons. Thousands of deer tramped the bushes, stripping branches of every bud. By winter, the deer staggered through the bare trees, thin as skeletons. By snowmelt, they were skeletons in truth. No wildflowers bloomed that spring. No songbirds nested, for the shrubbery lay bare. Summer wildfires had no bracken to burn, and so licked high into the old forest. Kara awoke with the knell of midnight in her ears and the taste of ash in her mouth. The next morning, and every morning after, Kara returned to the broken burrow. She fed ash twigs to the bowl of white fire. She caught pails of minnows and jars of fireflies. The brass scales still hung suspended by spider silk, mere grains from even. A comfort and a threat. Like a squirrel scenting snow, Kara scurried through the woods, gathering, searching, storing. She patched cables and mended bent gears, desperate to restore the ruined web. And when a white-spotted fawn crossed her path, she shuddered and quickened her pace. If the scales balanced before she repaired the engine... Kara became a wild thing herself, spending every moment of the shortening daylight outside. She fetched asters to replace the burned petals, dug river clay to mend the cracked bowls. On the last day of summer, every beaker was filled, every cog replaced, every feather refletched, yet the engine refused to start. Kara turned out her pockets and searched for the missing piece until she ran out of tears and daylight. At last she collapsed on the rough-hewn stool, exhausted. With her face buried in her hands, Kara didn't see the room flicker to life. The white flame burned sure and hot, the cedar-sweet smoke sluiced from limestone, and a shining took root in the depths of fine onyx eyes. And as the last grain of loam balanced the scales, and the chuntering gears whirred autumn into being, brown barred wings glided down to Kara's shoulder and brushed softly against her tear-stained cheeks until she fell asleep.
And welcome back. McLaughlin had this to say about the story. This story very much took root during my day job. Working for Ontario's provincial park system, I'm constantly reminded of what a fine balance goes into maintaining ecological integrity. Too many of one species or too few of another can have major consequences for an entire ecosystem. Also, I think we sometimes forget about our role within nature. Humans can impact the environment for the worse and for the better, but humanity itself is a cog within the system. Someone once told me we're a part of nature, not apart from it, and it struck a permanent chord. For my own part, after reading these stories, it reminded me that the equinoxes are a time of holding things in balance, whether it's light and dark, the past and the future, stability and change, fear and hope, or the idea that we're just one of many species in an interdependent web. I liked the idea that these celestial events were empirically measurable and that we could take a moment to remember that we're part of that same universe. Whether that has spiritual or secular implications doesn't really matter, though. You do you. You'll be welcome at the feast regardless.
That was our show for this week. On behalf of everyone here at Podcastle, our audio engineer Peter Baravesh, our forum moderator Asikat, your co-editors Jen Albert and Khalida Muhammad Ali, along with all of our amazing first readers, Aidan Doyle, Crystal Claxton, Matt Dovey, Eleanor Wood, Ebony Dunbar, Devin Martin, Elora Gatz, Julia Patt, Hamilton Perez, and Ace Ratcliffe. Thanks for letting us share another story with you.
Be sure to share it with your friends, hit us up on social media, and if you would like to show some extra love, head to patreon.com/EAPodcasts for special events, bonus episodes, and Podcastle appearances in the wild.
Finally, if you are an author or would like to be an author one day, our submissions window for Artemis Rising is open now. Check out podcastle.org for more details. Podcastle is distributed by Escape Artists Incorporated under the Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Feel free to share it, but don't change it or sell it.
Have a wonderful equinox, and we'll be back next week with another tale. See you then.